Sophie just did the unthinkable. She broke the royal code of silence and fired a direct shot that has the entire Commonwealth talking. The fallout from her recent speech was instant, spreading across dozens of nations within hours. But look closely at who this move actually destroys: Meghan Markle. Hidden inside Sophie's carefully chosen words was a calculated takedown that completely disrupts the Sussex image strategy. The dynamic has officially shifted, the gloves are off, and we are exposing the hidden message the palace tried to downplay. The remarks that lit the fire, not the beginning of the Sussex saga, or the beginning of whatever slow-burning tension exists between the women on opposite sides of this royal divide. The beginning of this specific moment, because this story has a precise starting point and it matters enormously. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, was speaking at a Commonwealth engagement, the kind of event that fills a certain kind of royal diary and generates a certain kind of polite coverage. Ribbon cuttings, formal greetings, speeches delivered to rooms full of people who are paying close attention even when the cameras suggest otherwise. Except, this time, the cameras were very much paying attention too. What Sophie said did not arrive wrapped in the careful diplomatic language that senior royals typically deploy at Commonwealth events. It was direct, pointed, the kind of language that makes the people in the room go very still because they are suddenly aware that something real is being said inside a space usually reserved for pleasantries. She spoke about service, about commitment, about what it actually means to represent the Commonwealth and the communities within it, about the difference between using a platform and genuinely being accountable to one. She spoke about showing up, not for camera or for content, but consistently, quietly, and without expectation of personal reward. She did not say Meghan's name. She did not need to. Every person in that room understood the subtext immediately. Every journalist covering the engagement understood it within minutes, and every person who watched the clip as it spread across social media understood it within seconds. Because the language Sophie used mapped so precisely onto the ongoing public conversation about Meghan's relationship with Commonwealth communities that the parallel was impossible to miss. Now, here's the first thing you need to understand about why this hit differently. Sophie is not known for verbal grenades. That is not her brand. That has never been her brand. She is known, after years of painful public recalibration, for being one of the most careful communicators in the entire royal family. Deliberate, measured, someone who chooses her words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, with precision and full awareness of the consequences, which means when Sophie deviates from that pattern, it is not an accident. People who have watched her closely for years were clear about this in the hours after the clip went viral. This was not a moment where Sophie got carried away. This was not an unscripted aside that escaped before her communications team could catch it. Senior royals at Commonwealth engagements operate with a level of preparation and oversight that makes genuine slip-ups extraordinarily rare. What the world heard was what Sophie intended the world to hear. And the Commonwealth setting was not incidental. It was the entire point, because here is what the domestic British coverage of this story has largely missed. The Commonwealth is not just a geopolitical structure that provides a backdrop for royal tours and formal dinners. For the people within it, particularly in the Caribbean nations, African member states, and the Pacific communities that have watched the Sussex story unfold from a very particular angle, the question of who speaks for them and who genuinely serves them is not an abstract one. It is personal and political, and it is deeply felt. Meghan has positioned herself, carefully and consistently, as a figure with a genuine connection to those communities, her heritage and advocacy, her public messaging around identity and representation. All of it has been aimed in part at building credibility within exactly the spaces that the Commonwealth represents. And Sophie just walked into the center of those spaces and said, with elegant precision, that words are not enough, that presence is not enough, that a platform built on identity without the sustained, unglamorous work of actual service is not the same thing as genuine commitment. In the context of a Commonwealth audience, that distinction lands like a verdict. So, what was Sophie actually responding to? In the weeks before Sophie's remarks, there had been a quiet but notable shift in how certain Commonwealth member communities were beginning to engage with the Sussex brand. specifically with Meghan's solo repositioning, the lifestyle content and the product launches, the carefully curated personal narrative that has been gaining significant traction in American media markets. In some Commonwealth spaces, particularly among community leaders and advocates in nations that have historically felt the gap between royal rhetoric and royal action most acutely, questions had begun to surface. Not hostile questions, genuine ones, about whether Meghan's platform, however large and however well-intentioned, was translating into anything tangible for the communities she invokes when she speaks about her identity and her purpose. Those questions were quiet. They were not making mainstream headlines, but they were circulating in exactly the rooms where Sophie was present and Meghan was not. And Sophie, who has spent years doing the unglamorous, uncelebrated work of Commonwealth engagement in communities that rarely generate viral content, walked into one of those rooms and answered the questions that had been forming there, not with a rebuttal or a confrontation, with a description of what genuine service looks like from the inside. The contrast drew itself. Sophie does not speak without purpose. Every person who knows her well and every analyst who has studied her public communications trajectory will tell you the same thing. She is not spontaneous in professional settings. She is not careless with language. And she is not operating as a free agent inside a palace structure that manages every senior royal's public output with considerable deliberate oversight. Which means the question is not just what Sophie said. The question is, who knew she was going to say it? And the answer to that question changes everything about what this moment actually represents. Because if Sophie's remarks were sanctioned, reviewed, approved, and quietly encouraged by the people around Charles who shape institutional strategy, then this is not one woman making pointed observations at a Commonwealth event. This is the palace, speaking, through the most trusted and credible voice currently available to it. And Meghan's team, according to people familiar with the situation, understood that immediately, which is why what happened next inside the Sussex camp looked, by every account available, a great deal like panic. Sophie's rise and what she really represents. To understand why Sophie's remarks carry the weight they do, you have to understand who Sophie actually is inside the royal family right now. Not who she was, who she is, because those are two very different things. And the distance between them is one of the most remarkable quiet transformations in modern royal history. Let us go back. Because this story does not start with Commonwealth speeches and viral moments. It starts with a woman who arrived inside the most scrutinized family on earth and promptly made every mistake available to her. Sophie Rhys-Jones, as she was known before her marriage to Prince Edward in June of 1999, was not a natural fit for royal life. She was warm, approachable, funny in the way that real people are funny, rather than the carefully managed way that royals are trained to be. She had a career in public relations and opinions. She had a personality that was not easily compressed into the particular shape that royal protocol demands. The early years were rough. There was the News of the World sting operation in 2001, where a reporter posing as a wealthy businessman recorded Sophie making candid and deeply unwise comments about senior political figures and members of the royal family itself. Yet the recordings were published. The fallout was immediate and severe. Sophie had to issue a public apology. The Queen, whose tolerance for public embarrassment was famously limited, was said to be deeply displeased. For a woman who had come from a public relations background, being caught in a public relations catastrophe of that magnitude was not just professionally humiliating. It was the kind of moment that defines how an institution sees you for years afterward. Then there was the business. Sophie's PR firm, RJH Public Relations, ran into serious difficulties around the same period. Questions were raised about client conflicts involving her royal status. The firm eventually folded. Sophie stepped back from her professional life entirely and committed fully to royal duties. It looked from the outside like a retreat. It was actually the beginning of something else entirely. What happened over the following decade and a half was not the story of a woman who had been humbled into compliance. It was the story of a woman who had decided, with complete clarity of purpose, to become genuinely good at something that most people outside the royal family do not fully appreciate. The quiet, sustained, relationship-driven work of Commonwealth engagement and royal service. She started showing up, consistently, in places that did not generate magazine covers or viral content. In communities dealing with preventable blindness in sub-Saharan Africa, where Sophie has championed eye health initiatives for years, traveling to clinics in conditions that are about as far from Kensington Palace as it is possible to get, in conversations about sexual violence in conflict zones, in meetings with community leaders in Commonwealth nations who needed to know that someone inside the palace structure was paying genuine attention. She showed up, and she kept showing up year after year, without fanfare or a Netflix documentary crew, without a memoir chapter explaining why she was there and what it meant to her personally. And the people she showed up for noticed. That is the thing about genuine service. It builds something that manufactured visibility cannot replicate. A kind of credibility that exists independently of press cycles and public narratives. The kind that lives in the rooms where the cameras are not pointing. Queen Elizabeth noticed too. In the final years of the Queen's life, as the royal family survived one crisis after another, Sophie emerged as one of the figures Elizabeth turned to most consistently, not for public duties specifically, for something more personal than that. The Queen, by multiple accounts from people close to her, found in Sophie a combination of loyalty, discretion, and genuine warmth that had become increasingly rare in her immediate circle. Sophie and Edward were among the family members who spent the most time with the Queen toward the end of her life. At Balmoral, at Windsor, in the private spaces where the institution stops and the family begins. Elizabeth trusted her. And that trust, inside a family where trust is the most carefully rationed currency available, translated into something significant. When Charles became king, he inherited that understanding of Sophie's value, and he has deployed it accordingly. Since the accession, Sophie has been elevated in ways that are subtle but unmistakable to anyone watching the internal dynamics of the working royal family. She and Edward were given the Edinburgh title, a designation that carries considerable historical weight. Her Commonwealth portfolio has expanded. Her presence at significant diplomatic and institutional moments has increased. She has become, in the careful choreography of royal public life, one of the primary faces that the palace projects when it wants to communicate something specific about who this family is and what it stands for. She is not just a senior royal, she is a trusted instrument of institutional messaging. And that is what makes her Commonwealth remark so significant. Because when you understand the journey Sophie has made, from the woman sitting in the rubble of a public relations disaster in 2001, to the woman standing at a Commonwealth podium in 2025 with the trust of two monarchs behind her, you understand that nothing she does in a professional capacity is accidental or lightweight. Every word she speaks in an official context is the product of experience, preparation, and a very clear understanding of what the institution needs from her at that moment. Sophie was responding to something very specific. A shift in how Commonwealth communities were beginning to engage with the Sussex narrative. A set of quiet but growing questions about the gap between Meghan's stated connection to Commonwealth identity and her actual presence in Commonwealth spaces. Sophie has been inside those spaces for years. She has heard those questions forming, and she answered them in the language she knows best, the language of sustained, visible, unglamorous commitment. Sophie's credibility on this subject is not just personal. It is institutional. When she speaks about service and accountability in a Commonwealth context, she is not speaking as one woman offering her opinion. She is speaking as someone whose track record in those specific communities gives her words a particular authority that very few people inside the royal family currently possess. Meghan's platform is large. Sophie's credibility in the specific spaces where Meghan wants to build influence is deep. Those are not the same thing. And the distinction matters enormously right now. Sophie does not operate as a free agent. She never has. The palace's communication structure does not work that way. Senior royals, particularly those who carry institutional weight in politically sensitive areas like Commonwealth relations, operate within a framework of oversight that most people outside the royal structure would find surprisingly rigorous. Which means the question of whether Sophie's remarks were sanctioned is not really a question at all. Of course they were. The real question is, at what level? Was this a communications team decision, a senior courtier's strategic call, or did it go higher than that? Did Charles himself, the man who has spent his entire adult life understanding the Commonwealth as both a political structure and a personal responsibility sign off on the direction, if not the specific words? People familiar with palace operations say the answer is almost certainly yes. Not because Charles is conducting a personal campaign against his former daughter-in-law, but because Charles, as king, is responsible for the institutional relationship with every Commonwealth member state. And if that relationship is being complicated by a narrative that originates outside the palace but references the palace's communities, Charles has both the motive and the authority to respond. Sophie was the perfect instrument for that response. Credible, trusted, beloved in exactly the spaces where the message needed to land. Clean enough in her own record that her words could not be easily dismissed as jealousy or institutional defensiveness. She is the most effective communicator the palace currently has access to for this specific purpose, and she delivered. Which means what happened next in the Sussex camp was not just a reaction to one woman's remarks at one Commonwealth event. It was a reaction to the full institutional weight that those remarks carried with them. The palace had spoken, through the most credible voice available to it, in the most strategically significant arena available to it, and Meghan's team understood, with complete clarity, that this was not a moment they could simply wait out or spin their way past. Because Sophie had not just gone viral across the Commonwealth. She had done something more consequential than that. She had made Meghan's most carefully constructed narrative look thin in exactly the places where it needed to be, strongest. And that is where the panic began. Meghan's world. When the remarks hit. Let us talk about what Meghan has actually been building. But because that context is everything. Without it, Sophie's remarks are just another royal family skirmish generating another news cycle. With it, they become something considerably more targeted, more damaging, and more difficult to recover from. So, strip away the noise for a moment. Forget the tabloid framing. Forget the Sussex defenders and the Sussex critics and the exhausting binary that most royal coverage forces this story into. Look at what Meghan has actually been doing in the past 18 months and where that work was pointing before Sophie's words landed. The As Ever brand launched with the kind of controlled momentum that speaks to serious strategic planning behind it. This was not a celebrity vanity project thrown together to generate headlines. The branding was considered, the product selection was deliberate. The rollout was paced in a way that suggested a team with a clear long-term vision for what they were building and where they wanted it to go. The Instagram return was surgical. Meghan did not come back to social media with a lengthy statement or a carefully worded explanation. She came back with an aesthetic, a point of view, a visual language that positioned her as something specific. Not a former royal, not a Sussex brand ambassador, a woman with a home, a garden, a kitchen, a life that looked genuinely appealing to a particular and very large audience. The numbers responded immediately. The growth was not gradual. It was a spike that media analysts noted with genuine surprise. Because organic growth at that velocity, in a social media landscape where attention is the scarcest resource available, does not happen by accident. It happens when a person or a brand taps into something that a large audience was already waiting for. Meghan tapped into it, and the podcast relaunch reinforced the same positioning. Intimate, personal, emotionally intelligent, the kind of content that builds genuine audience loyalty rather than passive viewership. The kind that makes people feel they know the person behind the microphone in a way that generates real staying power. From a pure brand architecture standpoint, what Meghan had been constructing was coherent, well-executed, and gaining genuine traction. But here's the thing about the specific platform she was building. It was not purely American. It was never meant to be. Underneath the lifestyle content, product launches, and the carefully curated personal narrative, there was a global dimension to Meghan's repositioning, one that has received almost no serious attention in the mainstream coverage of the Sussex story. A dimension that connects directly to the Commonwealth and directly to the moment Sophie's remarks detonated across that space. Meghan has been quietly developing relationships and conversations around a specific initiative, one focused on advocacy, representation, and opportunity for women in Commonwealth-adjacent communities, particularly young women in African nations and Caribbean communities. The kind of initiative that would, if successfully launched, give Meghan a credible humanitarian platform that existed entirely independently of her royal history, but drew on the identity narrative she has been carefully building. It was, in strategic terms, genuinely smart. It would have given her something the Sussex brand has always slightly lacked: institutional weight outside the entertainment and lifestyle space. A reason for serious people in serious rooms to engage with her as something other than a former royal generating content from a Montecito mansion. And it was gaining traction. Quietly, in exactly the Commonwealth spaces where Sophie had just detonated her remarks. Now, you understand why the timing was not incidental. Sophie did not just go viral across the Commonwealth in general. She went viral in the specific communities where Meghan's initiative was beginning to build momentum. Among the community leaders and advocacy networks and regional voices whose engagement Meghan needed to give the initiative genuine credibility. And Sophie's words, in those specific spaces, did not read as royal family drama. They read as a question. A pointed, well-sourced, institutionally credible question about the difference between proximity to Commonwealth identity and genuine accountability within it. In rooms where that distinction carries real weight, the question landed hard. Sources familiar with the Sussex operation describe the internal response in consistent terms. The word that keeps appearing from multiple directions is the same word used in this script's title: panic. Not the visible, reactive kind that generates public statements and social media posts. The internal kind. The kind that happens in private calls between a principal and her most trusted advisors when something has landed in a way that the existing playbook does not have a clean answer for. Because here is the specific problem Meghan's team was facing. Every previous attack on the Sussex brand had come from directions that were relatively straightforward to respond to. British tabloids, royal commentators, palace-adjacent briefings that could be framed as institutional defensiveness or establishment hostility. All of those attacks could be contextualized within the narrative Meghan had already established about why certain powerful British institutions did not want her to succeed. Sophie's remarks came from none of those directions. They came from inside the Commonwealth itself, delivered by a woman whose credibility in those spaces is built on years of physical presence and sustained commitment. A woman who cannot be credibly framed as a tabloid operative or a palace attack dog. A woman whose public record of Commonwealth service is so clean and so extensive that dismissing her as a hostile actor would make Meghan look defensive in exactly the spaces where she cannot afford to look defensive. That is the trap, and it was sprung with considerable precision. The public response from the Sussex camp was careful, measured in a way that itself communicated the scale of the internal concern. Because when a team as media-savvy as Meghan's responds to something with visible restraint, it is usually because they have identified that any more aggressive response would cause more damage than the original blow. They did not engage directly with Sophie's remarks or issue a statement. They did not brief friendly journalists with a counter-narrative. They went quiet in exactly the spaces where the remarks had landed loudest. And in the absence of a response, Sophie's words continued to circulate, continued to be discussed, continued to reshape the conversation in Commonwealth communities about what Meghan's platform actually represents, and whether it is built on something durable or something decorative. Now, here is the comparison that nobody in Meghan's camp wants to sit with, but cannot entirely avoid. Sophie's Commonwealth credibility was built in the dark. In clinics in sub-Saharan Africa, where the lighting was bad, conditions were difficult, and there was no content team capturing the moment for a future documentary. In meetings with community leaders who had seen enough royal tourism to know the difference between someone passing through and someone genuinely present. Meghan's Commonwealth connection has been built largely in the light, in speeches, in interviews, in identity narratives that are emotionally compelling and personally authentic, but that exist primarily in media spaces rather than in the physical communities they reference. Both things can be genuine. Authenticity and strategic visibility are not mutually exclusive, but in the specific judgment of the specific rooms where Sophie's remarks landed, one carries more weight than the other. And Meghan knows that, which is why the initiative she had been quietly developing was so important. It was the bridge between the narrative she has built and the physical presence she has not yet established. The thing that would have allowed her to point to something concrete and say, this is what the platform is for. This is what it produces in the real world. Sophie's remarks did not destroy that initiative, but they complicated it in a way that is very difficult to overstate. Because now, any public launch of that initiative will happen against a backdrop of a viral conversation about whether Meghan's Commonwealth engagement is substantive or performative. Any community leader who associates themselves publicly with the initiative will have to explore questions about Sophie's remarks and what they mean for the credibility of the project. The ground shifted significantly. At a moment when Meghan needed it to be stable, the Commonwealth initiative is not dead, but it has been pushed back, possibly significantly, because the prerequisite for its success was a baseline of credibility in Commonwealth spaces that Sophie's remarks have now forced Meghan to rebuild before she can move forward. That is not a minor setback. That is a strategic delay with real consequences. Was this a coordinated strike? Did Sophie's remarks land in these specific spaces at this specific moment by coincidence? Or was there a level of institutional awareness about what Meghan was building, and a deliberate decision to complicate it before it could gain enough momentum to become impossible to challenge? Because if it was coordinated, then this story is considerably larger than one viral moment at a Commonwealth event. The bigger war. Nobody is naming. Let us pull the lens back, because everything covered in this script so far makes considerably more sense when you stop looking at it as a royal family drama and start looking at it for what it actually is. A war for narrative control, not a petty one, or the kind of celebrity skirmish that burns bright for 48 hours and disappears. A sustained, sophisticated, high-stakes competition between two competing versions of a story, two competing visions of what the British monarchy means in the modern world, and two women who have, without either of them necessarily choosing this role, become the most visible symbols of each side. Let us name that clearly, because the mainstream coverage rarely does. Sophie represents something specific, the argument that the monarchy's value lies in quiet, consistent, unglamorous service, in showing up without expectation of recognition, in building relationships over years rather than audiences over months, in subordinating personal narrative to institutional purpose. Meghan represents something equally specific and equally coherent. The argument that institutions like the monarchy must evolve or become irrelevant. That representation matters. That visibility itself is a form of service when directed towards something larger than the individual wielding it. Both arguments have genuine merit and weaknesses, and the battle between them is not really about Sophie and Meghan as individuals. It is about which vision of relevance wins in a world that is simultaneously more connected and more fractured than any previous generation of royals has had to navigate. The Commonwealth is where that battle is currently most visible and most consequential. Because the Commonwealth is the space where both visions are being tested against real communities, with real stakes in the outcome. Communities with their own complicated history with the British monarchy, their own memories of what that institution has meant for them, their own evolving sense of what relationship, if any, they want to maintain with a royal family in the middle of a significant transition. Into that space walks Sophie, with years of physical presence behind her, with institutional credibility that no press release can manufacture, with carefully chosen words about service and accountability that landed in rooms already quietly asking those exact questions. And the response was not just viral, it was revealing. What it revealed was this: the narrative Meghan's team has worked hard to build, that her Commonwealth-adjacent identity gives her a genuine and meaningful connection to those communities, has not landed as solidly in those communities as it has in Western media markets. And there is warmth toward Meghan in many of those spaces. But there is also a pragmatic, unsentimental awareness of the difference between someone who speaks about a community and someone consistently present within it. Sophie's remarks gave language to that awareness. The awareness was already there. That is not a small problem for the Sussex brand. That is a foundational one. Now let us talk about William and Catherine, because they are present in this story, even in their silence. Neither has commented publicly on Sophie's remarks. They have not needed to. Their silence is not neutral, and it is not passive. It is the silence of people watching something unfold, exactly as they would want it to, and having the discipline not to interfere. William's relationship with Sophie and Edward has always been notably warm, a genuine personal connection that predates the current institutional dynamics considerably. And in the context of everything happening right now, that connection is not irrelevant. Because here is what people close to the situation say quietly, away from anything attributable. Sophie's Commonwealth positioning did not develop in isolation from the broader strategy being shaped around William's future reign. The elevation of Sophie and Edward, the expansion of her Commonwealth portfolio, the careful development of her credibility in the global spaces that will matter most to a 21st century monarchy. All of it fits within a larger plan for what the royal family looks like under William's kingship. Meghan's initiative, had it successfully launched, would have complicated that architecture. Not fatally, but meaningfully. Removing that complication before it fully formed was therefore not just Charles's institutional interest. It aligned with William's long-term strategic interest as well, which means the fingerprints on this moment may belong to more than one set of hands. Now, here is Harry. Harry is watching his wife's most carefully constructed initiative get complicated by an institution he left because he believed it was hostile to her. And in a painful irony that cuts to the heart of his current situation, he cannot publicly defend her without reinforcing exactly the narrative Sophie's remarks were designed to plant. If Harry speaks out against Sophie, he looks reactive. He looks like a man who cannot tolerate scrutiny of his wife's platform without turning it into a confrontation. If Harry says nothing, he looks either complicit or powerless. Neither reading helps him. Neither helps the reconciliation he has not entirely stopped hoping for. And each institutional move from the palace pushes him into a smaller space with fewer available responses. That compression is not accidental. The Commonwealth initiative is in serious jeopardy, not because Sophie's remarks legally prevent Meghan from moving forward, but because the viral conversation has reframed the initiative before it could frame itself. Any launch now happens into a headwind of questions Meghan's team does not yet have clean answers for. In the advocacy space, where credibility is the primary currency, that headwind carries risks a team as strategic as Meghan's will be reluctant to accept. The window for this initiative was specific. It is narrowing. Was this coordinated? The answer, assembled from everything laid out in this video, is yes. Not coordinated in the sense of a war room meeting with a whiteboard and a timeline. The British establishment does not work that way. It is subtler, more organic, more deniable. It was coordinated in the sense that the right person was in the right place with the right credibility at the right moment. That the words used mapped with precise accuracy onto the specific vulnerabilities of Meghan's current positioning. That the Commonwealth setting amplified the message in exactly the communities where it would do the most strategic damage. That does not happen by accident. It happens when an institution that has been doing this for centuries decides it is time to move, and deploys its most trusted instrument accordingly. Sophie was that instrument. She delivered with complete precision. So, where does this leave everyone? Charles consolidates. His Commonwealth narrative is stronger today than before Sophie spoke. William watches and waits. The architecture of his future reign has been quietly protected. Sophie emerges with her credibility not just intact, but significantly enhanced. Harry sits in California with fewer options than he had a week ago, and Meghan. Meghan is smart enough to know exactly what happened, experienced enough to understand that a reactive response makes things worse, and strategic enough to already be working on what comes next, because the next move belongs entirely to her. Sophie spoke, the Commonwealth listened, and Meghan felt every word of it. But strip away the drama, strip away the viral clips and the palace intrigue and the competing narratives fighting for dominance across two continents. What this story is really about is power. Who has it? Who is building it? And who is willing to fight for it in spaces most people never see? Sophie did not win this moment by being louder than Meghan. She won it by being present in rooms Meghan had not yet entered. By doing work that cameras had not captured. By building credibility the slow, unglamorous way that institutions ultimately respect above everything else. That is the lesson underneath all of this. And Meghan, who has proven she is nobody's victim, already knows it. The next move is hers.